Right, so first off, I'd just like to say that I think that owls have been getting away with far too much for far too long, so I have no real argument with the barn owls. The Titonids in general are perfectly acceptable, but the Strigids, I think, have been given far too much credit for their intelligence, which is barely there, and they are not as pretty as people say, and also I am fairly sure they're fledging, which may have something to do with my opinion right now. Anyway, part one of tonight's planting, because tonight is a two-parter, is going to be a Cinnamomus. So I'm not entirely sure which one. I will put the one that I hope it is up there, but there are a few species in this genus, and there's several that can be sold as cinnamon. I'm fairly sure it would have been labelled as Cassia if it was the sort of lower class cinnamon, so I think this should be the same species as the sort of higher class, less toxic, sometimes called Ceylon cinnamon. But I am not sure. They all look very much the same to me. They also all have in common that in our very friable soils and in our seasonally very dry climate, they like either a lot of shade or a lot of water, and preferably both. This is a much more tropical tree than us, so it can tolerate the heat very well, so this is not a bad time to put it in, but putting it in at this time of year, I do need to make sure that it is wet and not in the direct sun, because they burn very, very easily. I have one in quite a thickety area, which I pruned back the weeds around it once a little bit too much, and it lost all its new growth that year almost instantly, so they do like shade. So to that end, it is going in right next to a pre-planted specboom, which is the Portulicaria afra, which was put in here to sort of mark the corner of a path in my thicket area, and we're going to be putting it behind that, but that is not going to be enough to shelter it from the afternoon sun in and of itself. There are 2 layers of trees above this, which will do some, but both of them are somewhat deciduous, so I can't guarantee them. So instead we're going to be adding into that an aloe arborescens and a nice little triangle of Dracaena reflexa, the sort of Song of India type Dracaena, which should really help keep this nice and shaded and also quite humid. I'm going to leave a slight dip here because as much as it doesn't want to be too wet in our sandy soils, it should drain even in the height of the rain enough for a tree like this, and that should also make it easier to water it quite heavily when I need to. For part 2 of today's planting, we're going to be going with another replacement. So this time we're going in where the parrot's beak mango was. This was not actually a casualty of my absence. This was a casualty of, I think, the pouched rat. Something had bitten right through the crown of it just before I left, and I hadn't updated the list because I'd forgotten. But yeah, it seems to be dead, but I'm not going to be digging out in case it can regenerate from the root, but I do think that is unlikely because it was bitten right at the sort of junction there. But we're going to be replacing that with a tree that I was quite pleasantly surprised by how well one had done just before I left. Now, this is an olive, as is what I had planted just before, but that can refer to a whole range of sins. So this was labelled as African olive, and I think it is, but that is quite a variable subspecies. So this is the same species as the European olive, as far as I can tell, although there are a few other species of Olea, the olive genus, in Africa. But this has a much less waxy leaf, which hopefully will mean it's less flammable, so I am going to risk planting it a little further into the grassy areas than I would plant a European olive, which their waxy leaves can be quite flammable in times of drought, so I don't really want them anywhere that's too flammable already. And that should be everything for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it, and if you haven't enjoyed it, thank you for watching anyway. Please tune in again tomorrow, because I will be planting something else, and hopefully in daylight, but we'll see.